You are looking at a classified ad for a 90s sports sedan. And there it is. The squared-off headlights under a glass cover, that wedge shape, the absolute stance of a car that looks fast even when parked. You know exactly what it is, and you want it. But why? Why does the BMW E36 still have this grip on us decades later? It is not the oldest classic, it is not the newest tech masterpiece, but somehow it hits the absolute sweet spot of analog driving. Let me tell you how a car designed in the era of fax machines and shoulder pads became the ultimate benchmark for handling and pure driving joy. When BMW sat down to design the successor to the legendary E30, they had a massive problem. The E30 was universally loved. It was the yuppie dream machine and a track day weapon rolled into one. Replacing an icon is a nightmare. But the engineers in Munich did not just want an evolution, they wanted a revolution. They called it the dolphin shape. The aerodynamics were drastically improved, the cabin was pushed back, and the hood was lengthened to accommodate those glorious inline-six engines. When the E36 hit the streets in late 1990, it made everything else on the road look instantly old. Let us talk about what makes this chassis feel so alive. If you have ever driven an E30, you know the rear end can be a bit snappy. The semi-trailing arm suspension was great for its time, but it had limits. For the E36, BMW engineered the Z-axle multilink rear suspension. This was a game-changer. It kept the rear tyres firmly planted during hard cornering, giving the driver immense confidence. Combine that with a near 50-50 weight distribution and you get a chassis that communicates with you. It tells you exactly what the tyres are doing. You turn the wheel and the front end bites. You get on the throttle and the rear squats perfectly. This is the era before electric power steering numbed everything down. The hydraulic steering rack in the E36 is heavy, precise, and full of feedback. It is just you, the machine, and the road. Under the hood, things got serious. We started with the M50 engine family. The early non-Vanos M50B25 is an absolute tank. It has a cast iron block and is known to handle serious boost if you want to go the turbo route. But then BMW introduced Vanos, their variable valve timing system. The M50TU gave the car that much-needed low-end torque. Later came the M52, featuring an aluminum block in many markets, shedding weight off the nose and making the turn-in even sharper. The sound of a naturally aspirated BMW inline-six revving out to its red line is pure mechanical music. It is a raspy, metallic howl that you just do not hear in modern turbocharged engines. But we cannot talk about the E36 without talking about the big boss, the E36 M3. And this is where the story gets a bit controversial, especially if you live in North America. Europe got the absolute monster S50B30, featuring individual throttle bodies, solid lifters, and almost 300 horsepower. Later, they got the S50B32 Evolution engine, with 321 horsepower from 3.2 litres. Over 100 horsepower per litre naturally aspirated in the mid-90s. It was a race engine for the street. But when BMW decided to bring the M3 to the US market, they gave it what is essentially a tuned-up 325i engine. The US spec S50, and later the S52, did not have the individual throttle bodies. They had lower redlines and significantly less horsepower. For years, people complained that America got a watered-down M3. But here is the truth. The US M3 is still a phenomenal car. It makes peak torque much lower in the rev range, making it a fantastic daily driver and an absolute beast on tight autocross courses. And honestly, it is much cheaper and easier to maintain than the European engine. Both versions are brilliant, just in different ways. And if you want the ultimate unicorn, look up the E36 M3 Lightweight, painted in alpine white with those tricolour flag decals, stripped out interior, and zero sound deadening. Paul Walker owns several of them for a reason. They are the purest expression of the chassis. Speaking of purity, the E36 was built for the track. In the 90s, touring car racing was at its absolute peak. The British Touring Car Championship, the ADAC Super Tourenwagen Cup, the E36 Super Touring cars, sitting millimetre-perfect to the ground on centre-lock wheels, battling Alfa Romeos and Renaults door-to-door. Those naturally aspirated 2-litre S42 engines, revving to over 8,000 RPM, sounded like screaming banshees. The aerodynamics, the wide-body kits, the aggressive camber. This motorsport DNA trickled straight down into the street cars. What makes the M3 handle differently than a standard 328i? It is not just stiffer springs. BMW changed the suspension geometry. They used offset control arm bushings to increase caster, giving the M3 better high-speed stability and more dynamic negative camber when turning the wheel. The front strut mounts were reinforced and pushed back. Even the rear trailing arms got solid ball joints instead of rubber bushings in key locations to eliminate flex. It is this obsessive attention to millimetre-level geometry changes that transformed a luxury commuter into a track weapon. Not everyone could afford an M3 though, but BMW made sure the standard models were still brilliant. The 318IS, often called the poor man's M3, featured a high-revving M42 four-cylinder engine. It lacked the brute force of the straight six, but it was incredibly light on the nose, making it an absolute scalpel on twisty back roads. Then you had the 325i, the standard bearer. But later in the production run, things got interesting with the 323i and 328i. The 328i, with its M52B28 engine, was famously restricted by the factory to meet emissions and insurance regulations. They choked it with a restrictive intake manifold, but car guys quickly figured out that if you swap the intake manifold from an older M50 engine onto the M52, you suddenly unlock a massive surge of top-end power. It became the ultimate cheap modification. It turned the comfortable cruiser into a genuine M3 hunter. Step inside an E36 and you are greeted by an interior that completely ignores the passengers. The center console is aggressively tilted towards the driver. It is selfish in the best possible way. The amber illumination of the gauges at night is iconic, designed specifically to reduce eye strain during high-speed autobahn runs. And if you are lucky enough to sit in an M3 equipped with the legendary Vader seats, you know true support. Those massive shoulder bolsters look like they belong in a spaceship, holding you tightly in place while you pull serious G-forces. Now, let us have a real talk about ownership, because if you are thinking about buying one, you need to know what you are getting into. I am not going to sugarcoat it. The newest E36 is well over 2 decades old now, and German plastics from the 90s do not age like fine wine. They age like milk left in the sun. If you buy an E36, the very first thing you need to do, before you even buy a fancy steering wheel or cool rims, is overhaul the entire cooling system. The water pump has a plastic impeller that loves to shatter, turning your engine block into a pressure cooker. The radiator necks get brittle and snap off. The expansion tank will crack. Just rip it all out. Put in a high-quality aluminum radiator, a metal impeller water pump, an aluminum thermostat housing, and new silicone hoses. Your engine will thank you. Then, crawl under the back of the car and check the rear trailing arm bushings, or RTABs. When these fail, and they will fail, the rear wheels will steer themselves over bumps, making the car feel terrifying at highway speeds. Upgrade them to polyurethane, and be prepared to deal with oil leaks. The E36 marks its territory. The valve cover gaskets turn to brittle plastic over time, cracking and leaking oil directly into the spark plug wells. The power steering fluid reservoirs leak from the factory-crimped hoses, making a massive mess on the driver's side of the engine block. You will spend your weekends chasing vacuum leaks from cracked rubber intake boots, causing a rough idle that will drive you insane. You also have to talk about the Achilles heel of the E36 chassis, the sheet metal, specifically where the rear subframe mounts to the body. BMW grossly underestimated the stress that cornering forces would put on those mounting points. If you drive an E36 hard, especially with stickier modern tires or a stiffer suspension, those mounting points will literally tear themselves out of the floor pan. It is a brutal structural failure. The fix requires dropping the entire rear suspension, grinding away the undercoating, and welding in thick steel reinforcement plates. If you are buying an E36 today, getting under the car with a flashlight to inspect the subframe mounts is not optional, it is mandatory. You also need to weld reinforcement plates to the front strut towers to stop them from mushrooming over time. It sounds scary, but the aftermarket has solved this. The plates are cheap and the welding is straightforward for any competent shop. It is just the entry fee for owning a legend. Fixing these things is part of the journey. The E36 is famously easy to wrench on. The engine bay is relatively spacious, the bolt sizes make sense, and there is a massive online community. You can find a forum thread or a video showing you exactly how to fix absolutely everything on this car. We cannot ignore the second life the E36 has found in the modern era. Long after its racing days ended, the E36 found a new home on the drift track. Because they depreciated so heavily in the early 2000s, they became dirt cheap. Rear-wheel drive, a stout manual transmission, a reliable straight six, and a chassis that thrives on being thrown sideways. It was the perfect recipe. People started welding the differentials, slapping on cheap coilovers, and sending them backward into corners at 80 miles per hour. The E36 took serious abuse and kept asking for more. It became the go-to missile car for amateur drifters worldwide. While purists might cringe at seeing these cars battered and bruised, this drift tax era kept the chassis relevant. Let us talk gearboxes. If you are shopping for a manual E36, you will encounter two main gearboxes, the Getrag 250 in the lower tier models and the ZF 320 in the 328i and M3. The ZF is legendary. It is a bulletproof transmission that can handle absurd amounts of power. People regularly bolt massive turbochargers to stock M52 engines, push over 500 horsepower, and the factory ZF 5-speed just takes it. It has a heavy mechanical throw that clicks into gear with total authority. The modularity of the E36 platform is like playing with adult Legos. Parts from different models bolt right up to each other. You can take the brakes from an E46, the steering rack from a Z3, the sway bars from an M3, and build the ultimate Frankenstein handling machine. To truly grasp the magic of the E36, you have to drive it back-to-back with a modern sports sedan. Take a brand new, highly tuned car today. It is an absolute rocket ship. It will do 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. It has all-wheel drive, and it shifts gears faster than you can blink. But you feel completely detached. You are operating a highly sophisticated computer that happens to have wheels. The car is doing the work, you are just a passenger holding the steering wheel. Now get back into the E36. Turn the key. Listen to the mechanical clatter of the starter motor. Push down the clutch pedal, which requires actual leg effort. Shift into first gear, feeling the metal linkage slide into place. The moment you start rolling, you feel the texture of the asphalt through the steering wheel. You smell a faint mix of hot oil and old leather. You have to work for your speed. You have to keep the revs high, manage the weight transfer under braking, and precisely balance the throttle through the apex. The E36 does not flatter you. If you make a mistake, the car lets you know instantly. But when you get it right, when you hit that perfect heel and toe downshift and ride the wave of naturally aspirated torque out of a corner, the reward is purely intoxicating. It is a mechanical handshake between driver and machine. It is the realization that horsepower figures on a spec sheet do not dictate the size of the smile on your face. We are living in the twilight of internal combustion. Soon, everything will be silent, heavy, and heavily assisted. Cars like the E36 are not just old metal anymore. They are historical artifacts. They are a masterclass in chassis tuning from an era where engineers, not accountants or software developers, had the final say. So next time you see one sitting in traffic, maybe a bit lowered, maybe with a raspy exhaust note, give the driver a nod, because they know, they understand the secret. They are driving a piece of motorsport history that just happens to have turn signals and a trunk. And honestly, it might just be the best driver's car BMW ever made.